The illusion of peace in Los Angeles has been violently and permanently shattered, giving way to one of the most catastrophic and emotionally devastating climaxes in the history of the Forrester, Logan, and Spencer families. For weeks, a delicate and fragile calm had settled over Deacon Sharp and Taylor Hayes, a couple who had fought against all odds to find a sliver of happiness amidst the chaotic corporate and personal wars raging around them. Deacon, having finally secured his legal freedom after Sheila Carter signed their divorce papers, believed that the dark cloud hanging over his life had finally dissipated. He was ready to embrace a future filled with light, love, and unwavering commitment. However, the universe had a far more sinister plan in store, proving once again that in this city, happiness is often just a brief prelude to an apocalyptic nightmare. The evening was supposed to be a beautiful milestone, a moment etched in time where the weary souls finally decided to merge their paths forever. Deacon had meticulously planned every detail of his proposal to Taylor, ensuring the atmosphere was steeped in romance and profound sincerity. The soft, golden lighting cast a warm glow over Taylor's office, a space usually reserved for clinical analysis, but had now transformed into a sanctuary of love. As Deacon dropped to one knee, the raw emotion in his voice was palpable. He spoke of his past mistakes, his redemption, and how Taylor was the beacon of hope that guided him out of his darkest days. He presented a stunning diamond ring, a symbol of his eternal devotion, and asked her to spend the rest of her life by his side. Taylor, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of joy and breathless anticipation, looked down at the man who had completely captured her heart. Her eyes sparkled with unhinged tears of happiness, and her lips parted, ready to utter the word that would seal their future together, but the word never came. Before Taylor could accept the proposal, the heavy wooden door of her office creaked open with a chilling, ominous slowness that immediately sucked the warmth from the room. Stepping out from the shadows was Sheila Carter, and the sight of her sent an instant, paralyzing jolt of terror down Deacon's spine. The facade of the reformed, misunderstood woman that Sheila had so carefully crafted and weaponized over the past few weeks had completely melted away, leaving behind nothing but the raw, unhinged malevolence of a psychopath who had lost her final grip on reality. Her eyes, wide and manic, locked onto the intimate scene before her, burning with a jealous, destructive fury that defied all logic. But it was not just the madness in her eyes that froze Taylor and Deacon in their tracks. It was the cold, heavy glint of the loaded gun clutched tightly in Sheila's trembling hand. Sheila's voice, when she finally spoke, was a terrifying mix of a whisper and a venomous hiss. She began to unravel right before their eyes, her psychotic break manifesting in a chilling monologue about betrayal, ownership, and the absolute refusal to be replaced. She could not and would not accept that Taylor Hayes was about to secure the happiness that Sheila felt was rightfully hers. For weeks, Sheila had played the perfect role, signing the divorce papers and feigning a desire for a peaceful, separate life, all while secretly harboring a dark, festering obsession. Seeing Deacon on one knee, offering his soul to another woman, was the ultimate trigger. The charade was over. Sheila's supposed transformation into a better person was exposed as nothing more than a perfect, calculated act designed to lower everyone's defenses, and now the lethal reality of her true nature was on full display. Deacon's heart hammered against his ribs as he slowly rose to his feet, instinctively positioning his body to shield Taylor from the erratic woman brandishing the firearm. He pleaded with Sheila, his voice laced with a desperate, suffocating panic. He reminded her of the progress she had made, begging her not to throw her freedom away, hoping against hope that he could reach whatever shred of humanity might still exist within her fractured mind. But Sheila was entirely unreachable, lost in a delusional void where violence was the only remaining currency. She leveled the weapon directly at Taylor, her finger tightening on the trigger, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Taylor, relying on her years of psychiatric training, attempted to de-escalate the situation, speaking in a calm, soothing tone, but her words only seemed to fuel the raging inferno of Sheila's psychotic break. Realizing that reasoning was entirely futile and that Taylor's life was in imminent, lethal danger, Deacon made a split-second, desperate decision. With a primal shout, he lunged across the room, throwing his entire body weight towards Sheila in a frantic bid to wrestle the gun from her grasp. The office erupted into a chaotic, violent struggle. Furniture crashed to the floor, papers scattered into the air like macabre confetti, and the terrifying sounds of a physical struggle echoed off the walls. Taylor, refusing to be a passive victim, rushed forward to assist Deacon, grabbing at Sheila's arms in a desperate attempt to point the weapon away from them. For a few agonizing, breathless seconds, the three of them were locked in a deadly dance, grappling for control of the one object that held the power of life and death. Then, the unthinkable happened. A deafening, explosive crack shattered the air, a sound so loud and violent that it seemed to tear the very fabric of reality apart. The physical struggle instantly ceased, replaced by a horrifying, suspended silence. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl as the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the room. Deacon staggered back, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it defied description, as he watched Taylor gasp, her hands flying to her abdomen. A blooming, crimson stain began to spread rapidly across the fabric of her dress, a terrifying testament to the lethal damage that had just been inflicted. Taylor's knees buckled, her eyes rolling back as the shock and pain overwhelmed her system, and she collapsed heavily onto the floor, her life force immediately beginning to drain away. Deacon dropped to his knees beside her, his hands frantically pressing against the catastrophic wound in a desperate, futile attempt to stem the massive flow of blood. His voice cracked as he screamed for help, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood on his hands. The woman he loved, the woman he was about to marry, was bleeding out right in front of him, her life hanging by the thinnest, most fragile of threads. The crushing, suffocating weight of guilt slammed into Deacon's chest with the force of a freight train. He had championed Sheila's redemption. He had defended her to his family and friends. He had naively, foolishly believed that the monster had been tamed. And now, because of his blind trust and catastrophic misjudgment, Taylor was on the brink of death. His devastation was absolute, a soul-crushing agony that tore a scream of pure anguish from his throat. In the chaotic aftermath of the gunshot, Sheila stood frozen for a fraction of a second, staring at the carnage she had wrought before the survival instinct of a cornered predator kicked in. Without a word, she turned and fled the scene, disappearing into the labyrinth in corridors of the hospital, leaving Deacon alone with his dying fiancé. The emergency response was instantaneous. Medics swarmed the office, pushing a shattered Deacon aside as they frantically worked to stabilize Taylor, whose pulse was fading rapidly. The scene was a blur of shouting voices, flashing medical equipment, and the terrifying, rhythmic beeping of monitors that signaled a life slipping away into the abyss. Meanwhile, on another floor of the hospital, John Finn Finnegan was going about his rounds, entirely unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. When the emergency call came over the hospital intercom, detailing a critical gunshot wound in the psychiatric wing, a cold sense of dread washed over him. As Finn rushed toward the emergency room to assist, he was intercepted by security personnel who relayed the horrifying details of the crime scene. When Finn heard the names involved Taylor Hayes and Sheila Carter, the world seemed to stop spinning. The realization hit him with a visceral, sickening force. His biological mother, the woman he had secretly hoped could change, the woman he had nearly destroyed his marriage to protect, was the culprit. Finn's internal conflict, the agonizing battle between his biological connection to Sheila and his moral compass, was instantly and violently resolved. For weeks, he had harbored a secret belief that Sheila was capable of redemption. He had even made the catastrophic mistake of promising Sheila that he would advocate for her, that he would try to convince his wife, Steffy, to give her one more chance. But now, faced with the undeniable, bloody reality of Sheila's actions, the scales fell from his eyes. The woman who gave birth to him was not a misunderstood soul-seeking love. She was a ruthless, unhinged monster who had just attempted to murder his mother-in-law. A cold, hard resolve settled over Finn, replacing his usual compassionate demeanor with the focused, relentless determination of a man seeking justice. Utilizing his knowledge of the hospital's layout and security blind spots, Finn deduced Sheila's most likely escape route. He bypassed the swarming police officers and sprinted toward the upper levels of the building, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs. He burst through the heavy metal doors leading to the hospital roof, stepping out into the biting, howling wind of the Los Angeles night. There, standing near the perilous edge of the rooftop, was Sheila Carter. She was pacing erratically, the gun still clutched in her hand, her hair whipping wildly in the wind, looking every bit the cornered, desperate fugitive she had become. The atmospheric tension was suffocating, the flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers gathering on the streets below casting eerie, shifting shadows across the rooftop. "It's over, Sheila." Finn's voice boomed across the expanse of the roof, cutting through the howling wind with absolute authority. Sheila spun around, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and desperate hope as she saw her son. Even now, covered in the metaphorical and literal blood of her crimes, Sheila attempted to deploy her old manipulation tactics. She began to cry, her voice trembling as she spun a frantic, delusional narrative. She claimed it was an accident, that Taylor had provoked her, that she only wanted to protect her family. She begged Finn to understand, to see that she was a victim of circumstance, reaching out a trembling hand toward the son she had obsessed over for years. But Finn was no longer the conflicted, empathetic man she had manipulated in the past. He stood his ground, his eyes burning with a fierce, uncompromising judgment. He looked at the woman who had brought so much pain, terror, and destruction into the lives of everyone he loved, and he completely, unequivocally disowned her. He told her that she was nothing to him, that her claims of love were nothing but toxic poison, and that she had destroyed any chance of a relationship the moment she pulled that trigger. The life-or-death standoff on the edge of the roof reached a fever pitch as Sheila realized that her final, most important manipulation had failed. The son she had sacrificed everything for was looking at her not with love, but with absolute disgust and hatred. Before Sheila could make another erratic move, the heavy rooftop doors burst open again, and a heavily armed tactical unit of the LAPD swarmed the area. Weapons were drawn, and laser sights painted a terrifying grid across Sheila's chest. The commanding officer's voice echoed through a megaphone, demanding her immediate surrender. Realizing she was completely surrounded, with no escape route and no allies left in the world, the fight finally drained out of Sheila. She dropped the weapon, the metal clattering loudly against the concrete, and fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically as officers rushed forward to subdue and handcuff her. The finality of her capture was absolute, marking the end of her reign of terror, but the damage she had inflicted was already catastrophic. Down in the intensive care unit, the situation was dire. Steffy Forrester Finnegan arrived at the hospital in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic, having received a frantic phone call about the shooting. When she burst into the ICU viewing area and saw her mother lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a terrifying array of life support machines, her world shattered into a million jagged pieces. Taylor was pale, her breathing shallow and mechanically assisted, her life literally hanging by a thread, as a team of surgeons fought desperately to repair the massive internal damage caused by the gunshot. The sight of her strong, vibrant mother reduced to such a fragile state pushed Steffy past the brink of sorrow and straight into a realm of absolute, blinding fury. Steffy had warned everyone. She had screamed from the rooftops that Sheila Carter was a psychopath incapable of change. She had fought with Finn, argued with Taylor, and demanded that Deacon open his eyes to the danger, and she had been right all along. The vindication, however, was entirely hollow, replaced by a burning, visceral need for vengeance. When Finn approached her in the hallway, his face pale and etched with trauma, Steffy did not offer comfort. Instead, she turned to him, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, cold fire, and made a solemn, unbreakable vow. She swore on her life and the lives of her children that she would make her mother-in-law rot in a prison cell for the rest of her miserable existence. There would be no more escapes, no more legal loopholes, and no more manipulated judges. The stage is now set for a shocking, unprecedented legal battle that will shake the very foundations of Los Angeles. Steffy is mobilizing the immense wealth, power, and influence of the Forrester family to ensure that the district attorney pursues the maximum possible charges against Sheila, including attempted murder. The involvement of the police has escalated the situation into a high-profile media circus, drawing the attention of the entire city. The legal war will be brutal, unforgiving, and deeply personal as Steffy prepares to use every weapon in her arsenal to destroy the woman who nearly killed her mother. Meanwhile, Deacon Sharp remains a broken shell of a man, sitting vigil outside the ICU, drowning in a sea of toxic regret. His naive belief in Sheila's redemption has cost him everything, and if Taylor does not survive, he knows he will never be able to forgive himself. The consequences of this tragic night will leave permanent, indelible scars on the Forrester, Finnegan, and Logan families. As Taylor fights the most critical battle of her life, the dynamics of every relationship have been violently altered. Trust has been shattered, vows of vengeance have been made, and the true cost of Sheila Carter's madness has finally been paid in blood. The fallout from this catastrophic event will drive the narrative for months to come, promising viewers a gripping, emotional roller coaster as the characters navigate the darkest chapter of their lives.